Trevor Zegras traded today from the Anaheim Ducks to the Philadelphia Flyers. The return, Ryan Poehling, who's a bottom six center, more like a fourth line center, traded for the 45th overall pick, which of course is a second round pick, and a fourth round pick as well. So I think the immediate reaction is that it wasn't a huge cost to get Trevor Zegras away from Anaheim. What did you think of this trade?
I liked it for Philadelphia. There's, of course, no guarantee that Zegras thrives as a top six player next season. The last couple of years have been challenging and difficult for him. But I like this as a low risk, high upside move where you're betting on the player's talent. And really, what did you give up? You gave up a second round pick and a bottom six center. Most second round picks don't even make the NHL. And this is a player that we're not talking about has the potential to be a top six player. We're talking about he's already done it twice, where as a 20-year-old rookie, he scored 61 points. As a 21-year-old sophomore, he scored 65 points. The proof of concept is already there. It's about, can he tap back into that form? And for me, it's just rare to see a player put up 60 plus points in back-to-back years at that young of an age and not figure it out as a top six player consistently over their prime. I take these last 2 years, and I think it's a combination of him just dealing with injuries, obviously, part of which hampered his foot speed. I also think it was just straight up a poor fit for him with Greg Cronin. So many of the Ducks' young forwards stalled under Cronin offensively. Carlson didn't take a big step. Zegras obviously didn't take a step. McTavish didn't take a step this past season. I think Cronin sapped Zegras's offensive creativity to some degree, and he had Zegras so focused on the defensive side of the game that he was almost playing too safe. Like the way some fans will talk about, oh, Rick Tocchet is robbing Pettersson of the way of.
That's actually Greg Cronin.
That's actually Greg Cronin with Trevor Zegras, in my opinion, anyway. And so when I look at the scoring profile and even just the talent, like watching him as a prospect coming up and his early NHL career skill set, the playmaking vision, and how well he sees the ice, and not just putting up the point totals as well the first 2 years, but doing it mostly driving a line by himself. He didn't have star line mates to play with. He spent a lot of time playing with Sonny Milano, where it was clear that, okay, Zegras is the straw that's stirring the drink. And to do it as well in a team that wasn't producing a lot, I'm just a believer in his skill set. I'm a believer in his talent. And I think with a fresh start, better health, and a new coach, I expect him to be closer to the 60-point player that he was earlier in his career. And I like the fact that Philadelphia didn't have to pay a lot.
And I like this for Philadelphia for a couple reasons. You just said it as well. They didn't have to pay a lot in the trade. Where they will have to pay is if you're right about Zegras and he has this phenomenal bounce back. He becomes a top six center. He's an RFA after this season, and he is going to get paid if he bounces back and has that kind of production again, becomes the player that we've seen him be in the past in his career. So I really like the trade for Philadelphia. I don't necessarily not like it for Anaheim. I'm not looking at this and saying, oh, I think the Ducks could have gotten more. I think this is the trade market right now. This is the trade market that we're dealing with right now. And there's some people in the chat wondering about what this means for a potential Marco Rossi trade with the Canucks. And that's an interesting kind of topic to discuss. And we're going to talk about that later as well. But I did want to kind of keep focus on this Zegras deal. I really like it. I don't really like it for Anaheim, I suppose, but I don't hate it for Anaheim. I think it's a fair deal for both sides. Jacob, you said you had something to add here.
Yeah, I'm just going to back up some of what Harm said with some numbers. So mentioning that Greg Cronin really was changing the way that Zegras was playing. If you look at Zegras' NHL edge data, the change from his first 2 seasons to his last 2 seasons, which the last 2 were under Greg Cronin, huge difference in his skating distance, in his speed burst, in his shot numbers. It's very clear that this is a player who was being coached to not skate as much, not be as creative with the puck, not shoot as much as he was in his first 2 seasons, which were under Dallas Eakins. So, players don't just magically become different players overnight. Injuries might play a part in it, sure, but when you look specifically at his edge data and how much it has changed after his rookie and sophomore year compared to his final 2 years in Anaheim, I think a fresh start somewhere else, and you can say what you want about Rick Tocchet, but Rick Tocchet is not Greg Cronin. And I think that if Zegras is given the opportunity to be creative, to move around the ice the way that he used to, I think you'll see a bit of a bounce back in his point production.
Yeah, definitely agree. And this isn't to say it's a guarantee that Zegras is going to recapture his early career form. And there are still a couple of question marks. He still isn't the best player defensively. And he's awful on faceoffs, right? He's about a 41% career faceoff guy. So he needs to prove that to stick as a centerman. And I think he's much better and more dynamic and dangerous as a playmaker playing down the middle than he is on the wing. So like that is an area that either he's going to have to improve on faceoffs, or you need to find a winger that can sort of take draws for him. So that's, a potential obstacle for sure. But overall, I see the upside, and I don't think Philly had to give up a lot. People, of course, mentioned the red flags in terms of character concerns. Is he too much of a hot dog? Can you win with him? I'm not going to say that those concerns are necessarily wrong, but that's baked into why he was so cheap to acquire. And when you look at the PL Dubois acquisition in Washington, everybody was calling PLD a quitter, this and that, not just fans and media from the outside. I'm talking execs too. You ask about PL Dubois, and some of the things that these execs would say, especially ones from former teams he was on, was just like, wow, I've almost never heard an exec rip a player like this before in terms of like the work ethic and this and that. Mm-hmm. And yet, ask the Washington Capitals how they feel. They ended up getting him for practically nothing. And that's the key, right? Is this is the kind of trade where if it hits, and again, no guarantee that it does hit, but if it does, that's going to look like a steal for the Philadelphia Flyers in terms of what you gave up for him, especially when you consider how hard it is to find top six centers. That could end up being a lopsided win where you get disproportionate gains relative to what you gave up. That's the kind of trade the Canucks sort of need to find, where you don't give up a lot, but the player that you receive ends up becoming way better than maybe people around the league figured it was going to be. So people point out the red flags and the character and this and that. That's part of the reason. But yes, that's a risk factor, but that's also that can work in your favor because it means a player like Zegras goes for cheaper than he probably should based off his talent alone.
Okay, so you kind of alluded to it. Let's see what the people think. Our poll question, we just asked, now that you know what it cost, a second, a fourth round pick, and Ryan Poehling, would you have wanted the Canucks to trade for Trevor Zegras? 51% of voters say yes, 49% say no. Now, a comparable package for the Canucks, I saw some people throwing up Teddy Bluger. I don't think that's necessarily wrong, but like I looked more immediately, I thought of Drew O'Connor as being a more fair comparable to Ryan Poehling in terms of what it would take in this trade package. We're not going to disagree and spend time talking about if it should be Bluger or O'Connor. That tier of player is what we're talking about. Okay. Now that you know what it cost, a second, a fourth, and let's say it would cost Teddy Bluger for argument's sake. Okay. Should the Canucks have traded for Trevor Zegras? What do you think, Harm?
I lean towards yes. Again, acquisition cost wasn't high, and the Canucks don't have a lot of assets. Look, I love the idea of going after a proven higher end top six name like a JJ Peterka and Alex Tuck if you think you can sign him to an extension, although in that case it sounds based on, I think it was Elliot Friedman's reporting that the Sabres aren't even entertaining moving Tuck at this point anyway. But the larger point is, yeah, there are sort of names like Peterka that you can look at and go, that's more of like a clear check mark and wow, that guy's almost like a guaranteed fit. Whereas with a player like Zegras, there's more risk. But the key difference is for a player like Peterka, the cost is going to be astronomical. And the position the Canucks are in right now, where they don't necessarily have a ton of expendable assets moving forward. And we're talking about not just the need to add one top six forward, but realistically 2 or 3 over the next year or two for them to get to the point where they're a legit contender. Like this would have been, again, the kind of move that if it hits, you get disproportionate upside relative to what you gave up. And the Canucks need a sort of win like that. They need their own version of like the original JT Miller trade, their own version of the Sam Reinhart trade or the Sam Bennett trade, where you acquire a player that maybe hasn't fully hit their potential. You give up something for that guy, but not a whole lot, and it like that type of trade ends up looking like a steal in hindsight. That's the kind of upside a Zegras trade would have had. Again, no guarantee. This may not work out for the Philadelphia Flyers, right? There are legit reasons why it may not, and he may not stick at center. He may not get back to being a 60-point guy for sure, but the risk to reward ratio makes a lot of sense. And would have made sense for a team in the Canucks position where, again, they don't have a lot of pieces readily available to give up.
The really interesting thing is that the Canucks have been great with their value signings. Like, they've been great at signing guys and then getting more out of those guys than their previous teams got. Where they haven't really done that much is on the trade market yet. They haven't really traded for a guy who excels in Vancouver. And that's the type of trade, like you just said, that's the type of trade that they're looking to make. I lean toward yes with an asterisk. And the asterisk I'm going to bring up is that Trevor Zegras can't be the best trade or the best player that you bring in all offseason. And at this juncture, it's looking like it's going to be pretty damn difficult for the Canucks to make these 2 or 3 trades that we're talking about, where it's like, okay, you need to go get Marco Rossi, you need to go get Trevor Zegras, you need to go whatever, right? It's looking like it's going to be pretty difficult for them to do that. So if your offseason looks like Pius Suter re-signing and Trevor Zegras, and I don't know, like, I don't even want to come up with a name off the top of my head, but like a third forward who's worse than those 2 guys that I just brought up, I'm sorry, but you're looking at that and you're not holding that promise. I don't want to say it was a promise, but you're not improving the team the way that you kind of alluded to you were going to at your end of season media avails. And like, that's what Jim Rutherford did, right? Was he talked about, we're going to have most of our work done before free agency. We'll see what's left over in free agency. And of course, they can't be faulted for the fact that a changing NHL trade market has kind of changed their plans a bit. Obviously, the Abbotsford Canucks are still playing. That makes it a little difficult to go ahead and make trades right now. But if you're looking at this offseason through the lens of like, yeah, okay, they're going to need to get 2 or 3 really solid guys, or they need to get 1 really good player and then 2 guys after that. If you're looking at it through that lens, that's going to be difficult to do at this juncture. So I ask you this, Harm, I want to do like a sub poll question, because I say, yes, they can, if they got Trevor Zegras, they should have done it at that price, for the simple reason of that price leaves your first round pick available. That price leaves blue chip prospects available. You can go make a Marco Rossi trade after trading for Trevor Zegras. You can go make a Marco Rossi trade after trading for Mason Marchment. So I ask this, and I ask this to Canucks fans that are watching this. Would you be happy with the Canucks offseason? And this is a hypothetical since 2 of these players have already been traded. Would you have been happy if the Canucks trade for Marco Rossi, and that's their big trade, okay? Or they trade for JJ Peterka, and that's their big trade. They go into that top tier. That's their big trade. And then they go get Trevor Zegras or Mason Marchment, and then they re-sign Pius Suter. Would you be happy if that's the 3 players we're talking about? Sub-poll question. I'd say it's going to be similar to these results where it's mixed. I think there's going to be a good amount of people that say yes and a good amount that say no. But my broader point is just that you make the Zegras trade if you're the Canucks because it keeps your first round pick and it keeps that flexibility to do what you're out to do. And that is going to get 2 or 3 solid players that can upgrade your forward group. Because I think Trevor Zegras is an upgrade on basically almost everyone in the Canucks forward core right now, right? And I think that's a solid offseason. You go get Rossi, you go get, and not even Zegras, Marchment. Pick Marchment instead, okay? And that Marchment cost even less than Zegras did. If you go get Rossi and you go get Marchment or Zegras, and then you re-sign Pius Suter, like, I don't think anyone's looking at that and saying, oh, what an awful failure of an offseason. These guys didn't even try. No, that's a team taking swings. And I think that's what you want to see is them take some swings here.
And honestly, considering how much of a seller's market it is and how competitive it is to go and buy guys, that kind of hypothetical where Rossi, Marchment, and obviously he's not available anymore, and re-signing Suter potentially, that's a really good outcome considering where the market is at.
It's realistic. Like, it's realistic. It could have been done. It could have been done.
And I should also clarify, when I say I probably would have pulled the trigger on the Zegras trade, I'm not going to sit here and rip or criticize the Canucks for not doing it until I see what they do instead, right? Because it's, all right, you missed out on that opportunity. You decided not to enter those conversations. all right, that's fine. Now let's see what the alternative option
Exactly.
that you guys preferred is, right? And if it's Rossi, great. That was, I think, my big take is I was on, I think, Drance's show last week, maybe, and he said, is there like one target you have in mind? And sure, like Peterka would have been perfect, but in terms of a more like if they get JJ Peterka, that's amazing. But I'm gonna assume for now that he's unattainable for the Canucks, just assets wise and what the Sabres want. But sort of if I'm more realistic about targets, I wanted to see them swing at one of Rossi or Zegras. So it's all right. Zegras is off the board. Rossi's still there, and we know the Canucks have been pushing at him. So this may just be a case where, all right, they looked at both those guys and went, we'd rather pay for Rossi. He's our target. He's our guy. And if they go out and trade for Rossi for a reasonable price, I'm not going to look back at Zegras then and say, oh, well, why didn't they go trade for Trevor Zegras? Because they still sort of accomplish that overall goal of acquiring a player below the age of 25 years old who still has upside and can be a top six center.
I'm going to give you a take. Jacob, you could write this one in pencil. The NHL trade market is starting to reflect the Vancouver housing market. Prices are high, right? You're asking high prices, but the buyers aren't bucking up. So yeah, it's great that the Sabres want a lot for JJ Peterka, but last I checked, it's June 23rd, and they still haven't traded JJ Peterka. And if they have to get this done, if they're gonna make it happen, I'm gonna give you this take, Harm. JJ Peterka, write this down. This is the part you write down, Jacob. JJ Peterka is going to be traded for less than we think. When we see that trade, we're going to both go, whoa, okay, I thought it would have cost more. Because I think that's the reaction we've had with Marchment, and I think it's the reaction we've had with Zegras as well.
Yeah, but Peterka's a completely different tier of player. We're talking about a guy coming off a 68-point season, 23 years old.
Sure. But it's so competitive that you're waiting for a team to do it, and if no one does it, then at some point you're going to have to.
I think it's a little bit early to look at the lack of activity on the Peterka front and draw the conclusion that, they just set the price too high and no one's meeting it.
Yeah.
The draft is on Friday, so the Sabres still have a lot of time here, and I wouldn't be too quick to say that, all right, the asking price is too high. And hey, if that scenario unfolds where Peterka goes for less than we imagined, then I think the reaction you and I are going to have is, well, why did the Canucks go and get him then?
Absolutely. Write it down, Jacob. Write it down.